Hello students, Suman ma'am is here and today we are doing chapter The Enemy written by Pearl S. Buck. First of all, I am giving you introduction of this chapter. It is the time of World War II. Japan is at war with America. An American prisoner of war gets washed away to the doorstep of a Japanese doctor, Sadao Hoki. The choice is very hard for Dr. Sadao and his wife. Should they hand him over to the police or save him from dying? Being a doctor, Sadao gives top priority to save the life of a dying man. Not only does he save him, but also helps him in escaping to freedom. Let's start the chapter. Dr. Sadao Hoki's house was built on a spot of Japanese coast, where as a little boy he had often played. The low square stone house was set upon rocks well above a narrow beach that was outlined with bent pines. The writer introduces the main character of the story, Dr. Sadao Hoki. Dr. Sadao's house was situated on the coast of Japan. He had been living there since his childhood. The house had a low height and was made of stone. It was set upon the rocky beach, which had a boundary line made with pine trees that were tilted towards one side. As a boy, Sadao had climbed the pines, spotting himself on his bare feet as he had seen men do in the South Seas when they climbed for coconuts. As he had seen men do in the South Seas when they climbed for coconuts. When Dr. Sadao was a child, he would climb up the pine trees. On his visits to the South Seas, he would see men do so in order to get coconuts from the trees. His father had taken him often to the islands of those seas, and never had he failed to say to the little brave boy at his side, "Those islands yonder, they are the stepping stones to the future for Japan." He would accompany his father to the islands of the South Seas often. His father would point towards the islands and would say that those were the stepping stones towards the future of Japan. "Where shall we step from them?" Sadao had asked seriously. Dr. Sadao would caution him childishly that where would they reach from those islands? "Who knows?" his father had answered. "Who can limit our future? It depends on what we make it." His father would reply that it was not known. The future had no limits. It depends on mankind how it shaped its future. Sadao had taken this into his mind as he did everything his father said. His father, who never joked or played with him, but who spent infinite pains upon him, who was his only son. Sadao retained all the things that his father would tell him as a child. His father never played or joked with him. They shared a mature relation, and his father underwent a lot of hardships to bring him up, as he was his only son. Sadao knew that his education was his father's chief concern. Sadao knew that his father was concerned about his education. He was sent to America at the age of 22 to study surgery and medicine. He had come back at 30, and before his father died, he had seen Sadao become famous not only as a surgeon but as a scientist. He returned at the age of 30. Before dying, Sadao's father, Sadao became famous not only as a surgeon but also as a scientist because he was perfecting a discovery which would render wounds entirely clean. Render means make, perfecting, nearing completion. Sadao was on his way to discover a treatment for wounds which would make them absolutely clean. He had not been sent abroad with the troops. Also, he knew there was some slight danger that the old general might need an operation for condition for which he was now being treated medically. So he was not sent abroad with the armed forces as a doctor. Also, he was retained in Japan because the old general was suffering from an ailment which needed to be operated upon in case of any emergency. And for this possibility, Sadao was being kept in जापान और इसी पॉसिबिलिटी के कारण सदाओ को कहाँ पे रखा गया था? जापान में. Clouds were rising from the ocean now. The unexpected warmth of the past few days had at night drawn heavy fog from the cold waves. The writer describes the scene outside Dr. Sadao's house as the days were unusually warm and the sea waves were cold. Sadao watched mists hide outlines of the little island near the shore and then come creeping up the beach below the house. The nights became foggy. Dr. Sadao saw the boundary of nearby island became invisible gradually as it got covered in the mist. Slowly, the mist was coming closer to him. Soon there would be mist all around his house. At that time, he would go back into the house to his wife, Hana, who was waiting for him along with their 2 children. But at this moment, the door opened and she looked out, a dark blue woolen haori over her kimono. Haori means a loose outer garment worn over the kimono. What is kimono? A traditional Japanese garment. Before Sadao could go inside, the door opened as his wife looked out for him. She was wearing a dark blue colored gown over her dress. She came to him affectionately and put her arm through his as he stood, smiled and said nothing. She lovingly crossed her arm with hitch, smiled at him, remained silent and stood by him. He had met Hana in America, but he had waited to fall in love with her until his father showed she was Japanese. They had met in America. Sadao knew that his father would marry him to a Japanese girl only, and so he ensured this before falling in love with her. His father would never have received her unless he had been pure in her race. Sadao, he knew that his father would never receive her. She should be pure in her race. She should be a true Japanese. He wondered often whom he would have married if he had not met Hana, and by what luck he had found her in the most casual way by chance, literally at an American professor's house. Sadao considered himself to be lucky to have accidentally met her at American professor's house. He wondered that had he not met her, he would not have got a wife all his life. He thought that the professor and his wife were kind. The professor and his wife had been kind people and anxious to do something for their few foreign students. And the students, though bored, had accepted this kindness. Sadao had often told Hana how nearly he had not gone to Professor Harley's house that night. He was glad that they had accepted the kindness and went to their house because it was there that he had met a Hana. The rooms were so small, the food so bad, the professor's wife so valuable. Sadao would often tell Hana that it was a mere coincidence that he went to the professor's house that night, as the rooms in his house were small, the food was not good, and the professor's wife was very talkative. But he had gone, and there he had found Hana, a new student, and had felt he would love her if it were at all possible. If he had not gone there that night, he would not have met Hana. At that time, Hana was a new student. Sadao had thought that he would love her if at all it would be possible for him. Now he felt her hand on his arms and was aware of the pleasure it gave him, even though they had been married years enough to have the two children. Sadao and Hana loved each other even after having two children after many years of marriage. For they had not married heedlessly, carelessly in America. They had not married in America. They had finished their work at school and had come home to Japan. And when his father had seen her, the marriage had been arranged in the old Japanese way. Although Sadao and Hana had talked everything over beforehand, they were perfectly happy. She laid her cheeks against his arm. It was at this moment that both of them saw something black come out of the mist. It was a man. That moment, they saw a figure appear out of the mist. It appeared black in color due to the mist in the air. The outline of a man's body was visible. It was a man. He was flung up out of the ocean. Flung, it seemed, to his feet by a breaker. He staggered. Staggered means walked unsteadily as if about to fall. A few steps, his body outlined against the mist, his arms above his head, then the curled mist hid him again. The outline of a man's body was visible in the mist. He walked unsteadily with his arms above the head. It was an indication that he was a prisoner. The man walked a few steps and then disappeared in the mist. Who is that? Hannah cried. Upon seeing the figure, Hannah reacted by asking that who was that? She dropped Sadau's arm and they both leaned over the railing of the veranda. She took her arm out of Sadau's arm and both of them bent forward over the railing of the veranda to have a closer look at the man. Now they saw him again. The man was on his hands and knees crawling. Then they saw him fall on his face and lie there. Both of them bent forward over the railing of the veranda to have a closer look at the man. They saw him again. He was crawling on his hands and knees. Then he fell on the face and kept on lying there. Probably he had fainted. A fisherman, perhaps, Sadao said. Sadao said it may be a fisherman washed from his boat. He ran quickly down the steps and behind him Hannah came, her wide sleeves flying. As the area had villages full of fishermen, Sadao said that probably it was a fisherman who had been washed off his boat. He ran to help him. Hannah followed him. The low sleeves of her houri flew as she ran. A mile or two away on either side there were fishing villages, but here was only the bare and lonely coast. Dangerous with rocks, the surf beyond the beach was spiked with rocks. Somehow the man had managed to come through them. He must be badly torn. This part of the coast was not inhabited, as it had dangerous rocks on it. As the rocks were pointed, the man could be badly injured, although he had managed to come through them. They saw when they came towards him that indeed it was so. The sand on one side of him had already a stain of red soaking through. As the Japanese couple saw the man, they realized that he was badly injured. The sand on which he lay had blood stains on one side, which indicated that he was wounded. He is wounded, Sadao exclaimed. He made haste to the man who lay motionless, his face in the sand, an old cap stuck to his head, soaked with seawater. He was in wet rags of garments. Sadao stopped Hannah at his side and turned the man's head. They saw the face. Sadao said that the man was wounded. He approached the man who lay motionless with his face buried in the sand. An old cap hung on his head. It was soaked with the sea water. His dress was also wet and torn. Dr. Sadao turned the man's head as they saw the face. Hannah spoke confidently that he was an American. A white man, Hannah whispered. Hannah spoke confidently that he was a white man, means an American. Yes, it was a white man. The fat cap fell away, and there was his wet yellow hair, long as though for many weeks it had not been cut, and upon his young and tortured face was a rough yellow beard. He was unconscious and knew nothing that they did for him. The injured man was an American. As his cap fell off, they saw his wet yellow colored hair, which had not been cut for a long time. He was young. His face had such marks which indicated that he had been tortured. He had a rough, unkempt, yellow colored beard. As he had fainted, he did not know of the presence of Sadao and Hannah. Now Sadao remembered the wound, and with his expert fingers, he began to search for it. Sadao was reminded that the man was wounded, as he had seen bloodstains on the sand. As he was a doctor, he moved his trained fingers around the man's back. Blood flowed freshly at his touch. On the right side of his lower back, Sadao saw them that a gun wound had been reopened. The flesh was blackened with powder. Sometime, not many days ago, the man had been shot and had not been tended. It was bad chance that the rogue had struck the wound. Sadao was reminded that the man was wounded, as he had seen blood stains on the sand. As he was a doctor, he moved his trained finger around the man's back to search for the wound. He felt blood oozing out of a wound in the lower part of his back. It was a gunshot. The man had been injured a few days ago. He had not got any medical help to treat the wound, as he himself used some black colored powdery substance on it. The sharp rocks on the shore had pierced it, and so it was bleeding. Oh, how is he bleeding? Hannah whispered again in a solemn voice. The mist screened them now completely, and at this time of the day, no one came by. The fishermen had gone home, and even the chance beachcombers would have considered the day at an end. Solemn means serious and concerned. Beachcombers means a vagrant घुमक्कड़ खानाबदोश जिसे बोलते हैं. A vagrant who makes a living by searching beaches for articles of value and selling them. Hannah was concerned that the man was injured and said in a low voice that he was bleeding. The mist had intensified now. The three of them could not be spotted by anyone. Moreover, the fishermen and the rag pickers did not visit the place at that time of the day. What shall we do with this man? Sadao muttered, but his trained hands seemed of their own will to be doing what they could to stanch the fearful bleeding. He packed the wound with the sea moss that strewed the beach. The man moaned with pain in his stupor, but he did not awaken. Muttered. Muttered means speak in a low voice. Stench, stop or restrict. A flow of blood from a wound. Sea moss, a kind of seaweed. Strewed. Strewed means to be scattered untidily over a place or area. Moaned. Moaned, a low cry in pain. Stupor, a state of unconsciousness. बेहोशी की हालत. The best thing that we could do would be to put him back in the sea. Then Sadao said that the best thing was to put the man back into the sea. Sadao said, answering himself. Sadao answered to himself. Now that the bleeding was stopped for a moment, he stood up and dusted the sand from his hands. As the bleeding stopped, Sadao stood up and removed the dust from his hands. Yes, undoubtedly, that would be best, Hannah said steadily. But she continued to stare down at the motionless man. Hannah spotted his opinion but looked intently at the man as he lay still. If we sheltered a white man in our house, we should be arrested. And if we turned him over a prisoner, he would certainly die, Sadao said. Sadao said that if they gave him shelter, they would be arrested for sheltering an enemy. If they handed him over to Japanese army as a prisoner, then he would die in the prison. The kindest thing would be to put him back into the sea, Hannah said, but neither of them moved. They were staring with a curious repulsion upon the inert figure. As he thought that both the options were not favorable, so the best opinion was to put him back into the sea. Hannah added that the kindest act for them was to put him back into the sea. Both of them did not move to do so. Rather, they stared at the motionless figure with dislike. They disliked him because he was an enemy, an American. What is he? Hannah whispered. There is something about him that looks American, Sadao said. He took up the battered cap. Yes, they are almost gone. Was the faint lettering? A sailor, he said, from an American warship. He spelled it out, U.S. Navy. The man was a prisoner of war. Battered means torn or worn out. Hannah was inquisitive as she asked about the man's identity. Sadao replied that he appeared to be an American. He picked up the torn cap and read the words written on it, which were slightly visible. Faint lettering means slightly visible. He said that the man was a sailor from an American warship. and read out the words US Navy written on the cap. They concluded that the man had been taken into captivity during the war. He has escaped, Hannah cried softly. And that is why he is wounded. In the back, Sadao agreed. Sadao and Hannah discussed that the man had tried to escape from the prison and had been shot in the back. They hesitated, looking at each other. Then Hannah said with resolution, they were not able to gather the courage to throw him into the sea. That's why they were hesitated and they were looking towards each other. Then Hannah said with resolution, Come, are we able to put him back into the sea? She asked him if he was ready to put him into the sea. If I am able, are you? Sadao asked. No, Hannah said, but if you can do it alone. Sadao told her that he was able to do so and asked that, did Hannah have the courage for it? Hannah replied in the negative and added that if he could not do it by himself, then she had to help him. Sadao hesitated again. The strange thing is, he said that if the man were whole, I could turn him over to the police without difficulty. I care nothing for him. He is my enemy. All Americans are my enemy and he is only a common fellow. You see how foolish his face is. But since he is wounded, Sadao was reluctant in throwing the man into the sea. He reasoned that if the man was whole means well, he would hand him over to the police without any difficulty, without any hesitation. He added that he was not concerned about the man and considered him to be an enemy. As he was an American, he commented that the injured man was a common man, as his face looked as if he was a foolish person. He wanted to say that he was not bothered about the injured man, but his only concern was that he was wounded. You also cannot throw him back to the sea, Hannah said. Then there is only one thing to do. We must carry him into the house. But the servant, Sadao, inquired. Hannah said that if he could not throw him into the sea, then the second option was to carry him home. Sadao was concerned that the servants would object as they would shelter an enemy. We must simply tell them that we intend to give him the place, as indeed we must. Sadao, we must think of the children and your position. It would endanger all of us if we did not give this man over as a prisoner of war. Certainly, Sadao agreed. I would not think of doing anything else. Hannah said that they would tell them that they intended to hand him over to the police once he recovered. She told him that they must do that. She added that they must consider their children's future and Sadao's position. If they did not hand over a prisoner of war to the police, they would be in danger. Sadao replied that certainly he would do so, and he did not think of doing anything else. They agreed together. They lifted the man. He was very light, like a fowl that had been half starved for a long time until it is only feathers and skeleton. So his arms hanging, they carried him up the steps and into the side door of the house. This door opened into a passage, and down the passage they carried the man towards an empty bedroom. Foal means cock, hen. Sadao and Hana lifted the injured man into the house. He was very light. The writer compares his weight to that of hen that has not been fed for a long time, and its body loses flesh and reduced into mere feathers and skeleton. The man's arms were hanging, and the Jew carried him up the steps into the side door of the house. The man's arms were hanging, and they carried him up the steps into the side door of the house. The door opened into a passage, and they went down the passage towards the empty bedroom. It had been the bedroom of Sadao's father. That room was the bedroom of Sadao's father, and since his death it had not been used. The bedroom belonged to the Sadao's father and had not been used after his death. They laid the man on the deeply matted floor. The injured man was laid on the thick mat on the floor. Everything here had been Japanese to please the old man, who would never in his own home sit on a chair or sleep in a foreign bed. The writer describes the room. Everything in the room was Japanese as The writer describes the room. Everything in the room was Japanese, as Dao's father disliked foreign things. Hana went to the wall cupboards and slid back a door and took out a soft quilt. Hana went to the cupboard in the wall and took a soft quilt. She hesitated. The quilt was covered with flowered silk. She hesitated. The quilt was covered with flowered silk, and the lining was pure white silk. She resisted putting it on the injured man, because the quilt was made of silk, had a flowered print on it, and the lining was made of pure white silk. Quilt means here rajai. He is so dirty, he murmured in distress. Yes, he had better be washed, Sadao agreed. If you will fetch hot water, I will wash him. Distress, sadness. She was sad and spoke slowly that the man was very dirty. Sadao said that the man had to be washed. Sadao asked Hana to get hot water so that he could wash the man. I cannot bear for you. I cannot bear for you to touch him, she said. We shall have to tell the servant he is here. I will tell Yumi now. She can leave the children for a few minutes and she can wash him. Hana did not want that Sadao should touch the man. She said that they would ask the servants to wash the injured man. She would call Yumi to leave attending the children for a few minutes and wash him. Sadao considered a moment. Let it be so. He agreed. You tell Yumi and I will tell the others. Sadao thought for a moment and then agreed with Hana. He asked her to call Yumi and he would call other servants. But the utter pallor of the man's unconscious face moved him first to stoop and feel his pulse. It was faint, but it was there. He put his hand against the man's cold breast. The heart too was yet alive. Pallor means an unhealthy pale appearance. Stoop, bend forward. Pulse, heartbeat. Before he could go out, he saw the injured man's face. It was so pale that he stopped, bent forward, and felt his heartbeat to see if he was alive. The heartbeat was very faint, but it was there. Then Sadao placed his hand on the man's heart to feel it. It was also beating. Sadao concluded thus that the injured man was alive. He will die unless he is operated on, Sadao said, considering the question is whether he will not die anyway. Sadao commented that if the man was not operated upon, he would die. He added that even he was operated upon and saved, he would die at the hands of the Japanese army. So either ways, he would die. Hana cried out in fear, "Don't try to save him. What if he should live? What if he should die?" Sadao replied, and he stood gazing. Hana cried out in fear, "Don't try to save him. What if he should live?" Hana screamed with fear and asked thou not to save the man. She feared that if he lived, they would be in danger. What if he should die? Sadao replied. He stood gazing down the motionless man. This man must have extraordinary vitality, or this man must have extraordinary vitality, or he would have been dead by now. But then he was very young, perhaps not yet 25. You mean die from the operation? Hannah asked. Yes, Sadao said. Vitality, energy, life. Sadao questioned that what would be the implications of the man died. He looked down towards the injured man and wondered that he had a lot of energy which had kept him alive through such torture. He countered his thought with the fact that the man was very young. He seemed to be 25 years of age, and at that age, people do have a lot of energy. Hannah asked him that did he mean the man could die during the operation? Sadao confirmed her caution. Hannah considered this doubtfully, and when she did not answer, Sadao turned away. At any rate, something must be done with him, he said, and first he must be watched. He went quickly out of the room, and Hannah came behind him. She did not wish to be left alone with the white man. He was the first she had seen since she left America, and now he seemed to have nothing to do with those whom she had known there. Here she was her enemy, eminence, living or dead. Menace means danger, threat. Hannah was pondering over this possibility, and as she was taking time to reply, Sadao left. He said that something had to be done with the injured man, irrespective of the result. The first thing was to wash him. As he walked out of the room, Hannah followed him. She did not want to remain in the room alone with the white-skinned man. Since she had left America, he was the first white man she had seen. She had no contact with the Americans whom she had met, as they were her enemies. This injured man was also an enemy and was a threat to them. She turned to the nursery and called Yumi. Nursery here means a room in a house for the special use of young children. Hannah turned to the children's room and called out to Yumi. But the children heard her voice, and she had to go in for a moment and smile at them and play with the baby boy, now nearly 3 months old. As the children heard her voice, she went inside. Smiled at them and played with her 3 months old son. Over the baby's soft black hair, she motioned with her mouth, Yumi, come with me. As she held the baby who had soft black hair, she motioned with her mouth to Yumi, asking her to come. I will put the baby to bed, Yumi replied. He is ready. Yumi replied that the baby was ready for sleep and that she must put it to sleep before accompanying her. She went with Yumi into the bedroom next to the nursery and stood with the boy in her arms while Yumi spread the sleeping quilts on the floor and laid the baby between them. Hannah held the baby and went to the bedroom next to the nursery with Yumi. Yumi spread the sleeping quilts on the floor and laid the baby between them. Then Hannah led the way quickly and softly to the kitchen. The two servants were frightened at what their master had just told them. The old gardener, who was also a house servant, pulled the few hairs on his upper lip. Hannah led the way as they walked fast towards the kitchen. The two servants in the kitchen were scared after hearing their master's words regarding the injured man. The old gardener, who also worked as a servant, was pondering over the news and pulling the hair from his upper lip. Dear students, today we will do till here, and in our next video we will see what happens when the servants come to know that their master has sheltered to an American. Thank you.